All right, we're going to jump into hamstrings. A couple things to consider. We're going to want to do a knee hinge movement and a hip hinge movement. The knee hinges are things like glute ham raise, a lying hamstring curl, a standing hamstring curl, a seated hamstring curl. I've been a big fan recently of the seated hamstring curl because you can get full extension, and that seems in the research to provide a better outcome, particularly in terms of hypertrophy. But we're going to jump on this one today. It's a little more dynamic. We like to use this one for sports, in particular to work the posterior chain. Plus you also get, you'll notice as Matt talks through this, you'll also be getting the soleus from the calf in this exercise. So Matt, kick us off on the glute ham raise.
What Stan's getting ready to do is positioning. So you want to have enough room where, like, that's perfect. So like maybe a ½ inch of the kneecaps below the...
So you don't want your knee on the pad, and you certainly don't want it too far behind the pad. So try and get it so that when your toes are digging in, here, that you've got a little room for that knee to slide up and down and be against the pad.
So go ahead and hop in. The biggest things I see is people don't extend from the knee. So you want to keep a straight line from his, so if you actually go to the side, you'll see a straight line from the knee to the shoulder at all times. Most people will scoot their butt back to take the pressure off the hamstring, exactly. So if you go up, hands across your chest for, so this is a good way to start. And I just usually slow on the way out and then slow on the return because you don't want any soft tissue injury behind the knee. So slow, and then you can kind of build up speed as he comes back up. You notice he's got a dead straight line from his knee to his shoulder.
We're not hinging at the lumbar because it's not a lumbar movement. We're trying to get the hamstring at the knee.
Now what you'll find as you watch athletes keep going, the first thing you'll know when they're starting to get fatigued, or people with real weak hamstrings will start to externally rotate their foot to take pressure off their hamstring. So it's just like anything, all these tools are assessments as much as anything. So as he externally rotates, he doesn't do it because Stan's so strong, but you'll see a lot of athletes early on, they start to externally rotate their foot or their hip, and that's exactly. So they're trying to take pressure off their hamstring.
Matt's really good at these. I mean, not so much.
If they had good morning hams in the hamstring contest.
Yeah.
Glute ham and good morning totals. So again, I'm going to try to squeeze out of the bottom. These are real big with, in the 70s, like John Carlos was the sprinter who was kind of famous for, you know, doing the Black Panther. I think the 16 Olympics. This was his favorite exercise, they said.
This is one of the assessments we did in Albuquerque with John Jones. John Jones was really powerful deadlifting, but it was all quads. He was having a hard time locking out.
Yeah.
It's an immediate trigger that there's some posterior chain weakness. So we popped him on this. He couldn't do a single glute ham raise without bringing the glutes back.
Yeah, so a bad one is like this. When you see someone kind of throw their hips back.
Start driving the ass back first.
Yeah. So you want to feel like it's a slow pull and then squeeze the glute to the top. That's why I call it glute ham calf.
And now with some consistency twice a week, John's knocking out sets of 20 on these.
Yeah.
And athletically, or in terms of sports-specific benefits, now, because a lot of the takedown, a lot of people think it's not about quads, it's about hip extension. And so he's faster getting in under a takedown from working more posterior chain.
And the big thing too is, like Stan said, he's built to deadlift, so you think, well, he did deadlift a lot. Jay's got a little knee injury, so you can see that he's externally rotating that hip. Just try to feel like your toes are pointing in, Jay. But he's built to deadlift.
Right.
So something like this is actually a better tool for us to assess because we can isolate his posterior chain, and then we can see where he's got long arms and a long legs, so he's built, his hands are so strong you can't believe it. So he's built to deadlift, but this kind of exposed him. So he was deadlifting in the high fives when we met him.
Yep.
And now he's up to like 650. But it was mostly from doing this. You know, it's just like we talk about the deadlift. We could have him deadlift all the time, but this was really, he was really weak. So we did a lot more glute hams and accessories and some of the other stuff we're gonna show you today. And it took his deadlift right up anyway.
If you see somebody having a hard time with the lockout, they're staying here and they're not able to get their hips through, this is a great specific exercise for strengthening that lockout.
And one of the cool things that you can actually notice as well is we did a video on these a little while ago, we'll tag that there, but it's also a good way to determine their ability to maintain that torso rigidity.
Yeah,
right?
that's great.
That pelvis control as well.
That's a really good point, yeah.
You know, if they can't control and stabilize their torso, then their force isn't going to go into the hamstrings because that pelvis is rocking back and forth.
That's a really good point, yeah. No one talks about that. And then just like anything, you progress these. I mean, we like, we warm up now, like we'll do up to 4 sets of 25 in warm up, or you can add weight. And it just really depends what you like or what somebody needs, whatever you cycle a couple weeks of high reps and then throw in a band or,
Right.
And we will say this, obviously it's a plug, but the Elite FTS one's the best.
By far.
We've had people, they can do like 15, 20 reps on a competitor and then they come to the Elite one they can't get to.
Because we have that tilted.
Yeah.
Yep,
Exactly.
tilted in the front.
Why would you buy a posterior chain machine that's intentionally easier?
Yeah. Because you want it to be easier.
I often commented that about everything we've done in the fitness industry over the last 30 years is to make things easier on people. The elliptical, anything you can to make working out easier. And so we've got to come in here and try and change things to make them harder, because that's where we're going to get our results.
So if you watch my feet too, I dorsiflex when I'm fully extended, and then I plantar flex down because you really get some calf work.
He's digging his toes in, and that's a good calf work for the soleus. And that's the larger of the two along the side. Great for also for improving your knee, like if you had knee pain, working the soleus really helps with that, along with hamstring work.
Yeah, I don't really do any calf raises, but I have pretty decent calves, so mostly from this.
Braggart.
So, that's where it is, calves, and that's. I really do. I think this is what always worked my calves.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody can't do a full glute ham raise, how would you start them off with this machine? What would that look like for them?
That'd be centrics.
Yeah.
That's what we did with John. Just so if like Jason couldn't do one, which obviously Jason's an 800-pound raw squatter, so he can, but we were just let him kind of control it down.
Help them up.
Yep.
Stan and I actually improved our overhead press quite a bit early on.
A lot of tricep days.
Yeah. You could use a broomstick to help as well, or a band as well. But just if you have a spotter, then you do the eccentric and they help you with the concentric.
Yeah.
I think with the reverse band too over the shoulder, it's important that if you're giving them that assistance, you need to make sure their posture is flawless, or give them a stronger band so that they can do it flawlessly.
Nice thing about a glute ham too is you can really build them out. You could do maybe 15, 20 a day. You could cluster set them too.
Right.
So for people who for people who struggle to do a set of 15 maybe, you might do something like do a set of 5, a set of 4, a set of 3, and a set of 2, and then a set of 1, and then start back over. It actually will give you more volume over a short amount of time. And you can almost always get 5.
Right.
So you do a set of 5, then 4. But if you said like do sets of 15, somebody might break down. So cluster sets are a great one on this.
Accumulate volume during the workout. Might do 5 or 8 between every set of every exercise.
Yeah, or do it on your upper body days. Like that's one I always, like we do the same thing with pull-ups. Like somebody comes in, it's like squat day, go jump on and do some pull-ups. If that's the struggle you have is upper back weakness, that would be a time to work your, a lot of times people, that's a great time I think to work your weakness. Like
Yeah, you can knock these out every other day. One cue I utilize for people who are having a hard time figuring out how to get this done once they get in here, I try and drive my knees down. So I get to extend here. I'm thinking about pushing my thigh into the pad and driving my knee down. And that sometimes helps people execute the movement.
And you got to find what works for you because not everybody's like a professional lifter like Stan or has free time, but coming back later at night and doing them. If you can't come back later at night, I like to do them first because you got your body weight. You can't really you can use a reverse band or a spotter, but I would rather you do this first and then take weight off your deadlift or your squat.
Right.
Because you can lower the bar weight, but this is a kind of a priority one. That's really what we did with John. And like Stan said, and John's not the only athlete to ever do this, but he couldn't do one, and now he's doing sets of 25. as a warm-up.
And you can do them every other day, like we mentioned. This doesn't have to be something that you only do on hamstrings day. You can come in, knock out, or one evening, come in and knock out 3 sets of 20. Pop one of these in your garage or what have you.
100%.
This is like the chin up of the lower body, is what we like to say.
Posterior chain.
And I don't think it's unreasonable. I think most athletes should be able to do sets of 25. And I'm not saying you got to push that to. I remember a coach I used to work with thought they should be able to do sets of 50. That might be a little much, but after you can do sets of 25 pretty easy, then throw in weight, start holding a plate or a band.
Well, even for like powerlifters, right? Like if they cannot do a set of 10 or 15 on these,
Exactly.
and then they're deadlifting, it's like, okay, what's happening in that deadlift that you're not supposed to be doing?
We like to find people's weaknesses, and obviously Louis been doing that for decades.
Yep.
And then just focus on bringing those up.
It's funny, like, we'll talk about this more later, but Stan had an athlete come to me and say, like, they wanted their deadlift better, and they're like, can you watch my technique? And I brought them over here. And they couldn't do one.
Him or her. Yeah. Hopefully she won't watch and get upset.
Exactly.
Couldn't do a single glute ham raise, but was concerned about technique.
Right.
So a lot of times, obviously we know technique's critical. A lot of times I think technique's overrated in this regard. It'd be like telling me to dunk a basketball right now. I get the concept, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
So sometimes your technique's just a matter of you just need to get stronger in certain areas, and that's why your technique's breaking down.
Well, it's funny, you had mentioned pull-ups too, is that's also a great diagnostic tool. They're like, oh, my deadlift is stuck. I'm like, all right, can you do a pull-up? They're like, no.
Yeah.
Like, well, then your lats can't control, they can't stabilize any forces, and then you're going to be in a position where you're just running into a wall.
So, I'll get killed for saying that. By all means, technique's king. But technique's going to be determined by your strength. Like we always talk about this, if you see a guy who bends over when they squat, they're doing that because their back's stronger than their legs.
It's like when Dave says you got to get from shit to suck. You know what I mean? Before you have to worry about technique, you got to make sure you can actually get
so
move that body.
Like a tool like this, like to your point, if if somebody can't do one of these and they're worried about why they can't keep their sternum up in their deadlift, so you're probably just not strong enough.
Right.
Well, that wraps up the knee hinge, so we're going to go to a hip hinge. In terms of volume, like weekly volume, if this is an accessory and you're trying to build hypertrophy or just build up your strength, kind of a minimum effective volume is about 10 sets a week of hamstrings. So you could come in and do, say, 3 sets of these knee hinges, another 3 sets of hip hinges, be done, then come back later in the week and do the same thing. You get your minimum effective volume, and of course you could progress from there.
We're going to use the Posterior Chain Developer. And the other thing I like about warming up with accessories is if something, like especially every one of us is a pretty advanced in years lifter, it's great to find out what's going on with your body before you load a couple 100 pounds on your back or in your hand. But we like this as, for the Posterior Chain Developer, as a small gym owner, this is fantastic because you can really save some space. It does 2 in 1. But with this motion, so basically a reverse back extension is what we're going to do. You're going to hop up here and really try to almost pause it at the top. And it's tough to do, but with this longer strap, you're going to feel a lot more glute and hamstring. With a shorter strap, you're going to feel a lot more lower back. It doesn't look like it, but every rep, I am really trying to fight that thing coming back. And again, that's really hitting the glutes and the hamstrings super hard. So it's nice if ideally you could do the glute ham and the hip hinge on the same machine. So that's a great feature.
It's almost like we knew what we were doing.
Oh, yeah. As if.
Now the warm-ups are, I like how you guys do your warm-ups because you're using them as a feedback tool.
100%, yeah.
Right? So you're using it. It's like you have to see, like, all right, how am I at knee hinge? How am I at hip hinge? Like, what's my core doing? What's my torso doing? You know what I mean? That's all that information comes in through just very simple exercises.
But the reason I like doing this first, and again, nothing's new. We talked about this. This is stuff that was around years ago. I remember when I would visit West Side pretty regularly, twice a week for years, and Louie and Chuck and Dave would just be slamming tons of accessories before we ever touched the barbell.
Right.
You know, now everybody's got like a catch a phrase for them, or
Sure.
you know, it's like invented, but it's really just what it does is three things. Warms you up. It allows you to target weak points and build volume in the weak point areas.
Yep.
And then to your point, you're assessing how you feel. So if Jason's coming off a little bit of a knee injury, he'll figure out if his knee's hurting now before he loads it up.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to find that out under 600 pounds on a bar.
No.
That does feel good.
I really try to use the whole thing. So I'll actually, again, dorsiflex at the bottom, and then really plantar flex hard at the top. They call it glute activation now, but it's just a way to reinforce what you're trying to get.
Yeah, you can't train without turning your glutes on.
That's right.
Well, there's little subtleties to it, some of these exercises. There's different things we might do with a certain athlete. I might have someone keep their foot dorsiflexed the whole time and keep their knee extended. If I want to really stretch the hamstrings harder at the bottom, if I'm looking more for the rehabilitative benefit
Right.
versus the strengthening benefit, where Matt's flexing his knees hard at the top.
Now, have you guys worked with athletes or clients where it's like they don't even get into the strap, you just want to teach them the movement even without the
100%.
strap?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this movement gets a bad name because everybody says you're, like a spinal flexion or load. But I always thought it was more of hip flexion or load. It should be. Yeah, it's not your spine.
There's no load on your spine.
Yeah.
I think too, for advanced lifters or older lifters, to prevent overtraining, doing some moderately serious accessory work as a warm-up takes the edge off to protect that nervous system a little bit when you do go to the barbell compound movement too.
You're up again.
Am I?
Jump in one more.
Yeah, I'll do another one. I think especially if you're heading towards a powerlifting competition, to slam the non-barbell volume in the early part of that phase, and then you make that dump near the end, then you feel amazing when you cut your non-barbell volume in half. That's a nice psychological boost too as you're getting near those 6 weeks out, 5 weeks out.
Yeah, when you have to have that volume on the barbell up nice and high.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you can get out of there as pain-free as possible.
100%.
Jason hit on something important there. That's the keyword volume. One of the big mistakes I made the last couple of years when I wasn't bodybuilding and I was just powerlifting, my last 2 years of competing, the bodybuilding provided me, in retrospect, strictly by accident or the fact that I competed in both bodybuilding and powerlifting, the bodybuilding provided me an enormous amount of volume. And frequency, which helped with my cardiovascular, which had a big carryover into the powerlifting. And the mistake I made the last couple of years, and that a lot of people that are just strictly powerlifting make, is they don't get enough accessory volume in, both for shoring up weaknesses, building hypertrophy, but also in terms of the cardiovascular benefit, so you can just recover better from your heavy training loads. And the volume can be a lot of concentric work, like we've talked about today, with a low stimulus to fatigue ratio. So these kind of movements, I think, lend themselves well to getting a lot of extra volume, which can help, obviously, with recovery and maintain your strength and hypertrophy and size and cardiovascular fitness going into a powerlifting meet.